All right, welcome to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco. This is your host, Jamal and my co-host, Jess Ghanem, is out of town. And we're going to have a great show for you today. We have in the house right here, for the second time, I think, Maad Abu-Ghazalah. And Maad is actually, you and I go back for a long time now. I was like thinking about it, and it has been more than 20 years, Maad. Yeah, time flies. So Maad is back here, you know, from Palestine, from Asira, which is south of Nablus. It's east of Nablus. Yeah, so I just want to give a little bit of background, because you have a very complex background, really, Maad. People don't know. I mean, I put the title of the show, Daily Hugz, right? So I'll start a little bit with this Daily Hugz. Do we need one?
Yeah.
And when we talk about Daily Hugz, people think, well, what is Daily Hugz?
Mm-hmm. Well, it was an idea I came up with around 2013. Went back to Palestine after being away for decades, and I just looked around and wanted to see, you know, what I could do to help the people in the resistance to the occupation. And you know, the obvious things, you know, people say just give money, donate to the poor, whatever. I wanted to do something more active than just passively giving money. And so I think what I thought needed the most attention was the people's morale and mentality, that the occupation had inflicted so much damage on the people's psyche, on their psychology, that just as if, you know, somebody gets shot, they need therapy, physical therapy, you know, in this case, these were emotional wounds that people had to heal from. So, you know, I decided to create a sanctuary in the middle of the West Bank, where, you know, people could see a more peaceful existence, to give people hope that, you know, there is a better way to live than the way you're living now, because, you know, living under military occupation is really like being in a big prison. So you can get frustrated and lose hope, but, you know, I wanted to remind people, you know, that there's something in life that's really worth living for. So I created the sanctuary, rescue animals, teach people how to care for animals, And you know, one more thing about it is I also wanted to show a counter argument to the argument the Israelis are making, which is, you know, the strong eats the weak. That's the argument people see played out every day.
That's right.
You know, the guy with the soldier with the gun gets to call the shots, and that's the mentality people were living under. I wanted to show them, you know, there is another way, which is if you have power, you have a responsibility to share and take care of the people that don't have power. So, you know, that's what the big part of Daily Hugz, the sanctuary, is we get the weakest elements in society, and we care for them. We share hugs with them.
I want to go back. I mean, we'll go back to Daily Hugz, because I want to get more details, because since we saw you last time, I mean, things have never been good.
No, it's dramatic.
Especially for
changing.
Palestinians, you know.
Yeah.
7 decades they've been struggling, and people are full of hope, but it seems like every time we meet, I mean, here we go from the last time we met, and you probably were back here, and everybody was waiting for that deal of the century.
Yeah.
And then now we know what's in that deal of the century.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, what kind of impact is this going to leave on the little hope that some people have back there, the lives of the children, families who are going to be living in Bantustans, really? I mean, when you talk to me, you know, where you're at, it's going to be, Asira is going to be part of the larger Nablus Bantustan, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You always think you've hit bottom, and then it gets worse. And it is pretty low. To be honest, nobody really had high expectations about the Trump deal. But it was probably as bad as anybody could have imagined. And yeah, it's just this constant, tweaking these nerves of making things more and more difficult and frustrating, which is why, the people say, existence is resistance, is we have to survive. And in Palestine, existence is an active word. Because if you don't do anything, you'll cease to exist. The Zionists are trying to eliminate the Palestinian identity. So if you do nothing to fight back, to just exert your own identity, actively exert your identity, their argument that there's no such thing as a Palestinian will be the only argument heard. And then, the next thing that's going to happen, as you saw in the Trump deal, which I assume is going to be, we're going to talk about later, is they'll say there's no such thing as Palestinians. These are just individuals, nomads from other Arab countries. Each nomad takes some money and get out of our land, which should be exclusively Jewish. So to answer your question, I think that the response that we're seeing is I think they've reached a peak in terms of frustration, and so now they're just using the Palestinian word sabr. They're being patient. They're actively existing and resisting through their existence, and I don't see that. I mean, I've talked to people since the Trump deal, and nobody is considering this nonsense about them taking money and leaving. It's not even on the table in the Palestinians. It's like even somebody who barely has food to eat would not consider taking a dime to leave their land.
I mean, you're back in the States. Again, my guest for the full hour is Maad Abu-Ghazalah. Maad and I go back for 20 years or so. And you're back. You're living in Palestine. You come back from time to time to visit the States. And you're now like, you're taking him back in time, because when we first met, or shortly after we met, you ran for Congress right here, and now
I reinvented myself.
And now we have elections. You're in the midst of elections. You also witnessed within the past couple of years, Palestinian American elected to Congress, Rashida Tlaib. You have the first Muslim American hijabi woman from Somalia also got elected. And I think there are at least two additional candidates running for elections, Palestinians. You have Rush Darwish in Chicago, and you have in Southern California also another candidate running. This has changed, because when you first ran, it was a novelty.
Yeah, I think there's been a huge change in the landscape since I ran. Just look at the Palestinian issue. Back then, there was no real talk about the Palestinians. When the first, not the first Gaza war, but not the recent one, the one before it happened, more people were killed, and it didn't even make the news. And the more recent one, when they did the bombings, was it 2014?
And in Gaza, 16.
16?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was all over the papers. People were naive. They still thought, well, this is clearly wrong. We can change things overnight, not realizing there's this huge Israeli lobby preventing any change. But yeah, there's been a big shift in the political landscape. But I still think there's a lot of grassroots that needs to be done, because at the top levels, how much has really changed? The aid to Israel is the same as it's ever been. You're seeing this anti-BDS laws being passed. So, the political power is shifting. We have momentum, but we have a long, long way to go.
Yeah, I mean, there are, though, a lot of similarities, even though things have gotten worse. And I'm just taking you back 18 years ago, because when you ran, that was during the Bush administration, and was shortly right after 9/11, with the Islamophobia pretty much peaking in this country, anti-Arab sentiment and so forth. Trump is reviving this. It's like almost every day or so there's the Muslim ban. Anti-immigrant sentiment is growing. The rise of white supremacy. You'll think like 20 years, and then people were hopeful during the Obama administration that, we've elected the first black president in this country, and now things have gone like south, way south.
And things could be getting worse. I mean, I think this is what I was telling you earlier was I think what you're seeing is reactions. right? So you're seeing, there was this first there was 9/11, and this immediate reaction to 9/11 was anti-Muslim sentiment, exclusivity, that it's a white nation, white Christian nation. And then we had this opening up to, a more, let's say, open society with different cultures. And then a reaction to that was Trump. And I think what you're seeing is that when people form tribes and groups, they stick to those identities much tighter when they feel threatened. So what you see is an escalation, right? So, and we're seeing this happen. We're seeing, the Trump side escalating things. So the anti-Trump side feels threatened. Now they have to escalate things, and the rhetoric is getting more and more antagonistic. And the same thing is happening in the Palestinian area, where you have the Israelis are now the Jews in Israel feel they're being threatened. So now they're a tight tribe, and they have to consolidate their power. And they have nuclear weapons, and they're fighting kids in the street with rocks, but somehow they've been able to be manipulated into thinking that they're under existential threat.
Well, explain that mentality. I mean, you've said it. Mm-hmm. Israel is one of the strongest military in the world. Mm-hmm. They have nuclear weapons. They have the full support of the United States, which is the only superpower now in the world. And yet they feel threatened by kids. I just watched the other day a kid, 13-year-old boy in Hebron, getting arrested with his mother trying to hug him, and they're just yanking him, throwing him into the back of a Jeep. So what is that threat?
Well, it's how they've been brainwashed by not seeing any Palestinians. I mean, this is part of the whole apartheid system, is they don't see any Palestinians except when they're perceived as doing something violent or terrorist. So an example of how they do this, there's, since you've traveled to Palestine a lot, you've seen these big red signs, right? Mm-hmm. As soon as you cross out of Israel, 48 Israel, into the Palestinian area, the West Bank and Gaza, there's this huge red sign in bright red that says it's illegal for you to go into the Palestinian area. This is dangerous for your life. They just try to threaten you as much as possible in order to keep people separate, in order for them to be able to manipulate the minds of the people inside of 48 Palestine into thinking that the only Palestinians, that all Palestinians are terrorists, and since you're not being presented any other Palestinian, they beat you down. You start to think, well, that must be the case, because that's the only Palestinians I see are these people on TV causing problems. Can I just give you an example, Jamal? We were just talking about my sanctuary. So, one thing I thought, the way to counterbalance this thing that I'm talking about the tribes just escalating their fear of each other, is to find a unity, commonality between the people. Right. And to be honest, that's one of the reasons I got out of politics, is I felt that there wasn't enough work being done on the grassroots level. That change really does have to come from the grassroots, and the grassroots wasn't ready. They weren't ready to see each other as being common. Mm-hmm. So that's why I started this Daily Hugz organization. But anyway, so I had animals to rescue. The veterinary care inside of the West Bank is not very good. So there's a vet inside of Tel Aviv that said, hey, why don't you, if you have any situations, why don't you bring your animals here and I can help you take care of them. I thought that was, there's an area of commonality. We have a love for other living beings. So I took her up on it. And so when I had a dog that had been hit by a car, I took the dog over to her in Tel Aviv, and somehow it was during the Netanyahu election, and the elections for prime minister in Israel, and somehow I let it slip out that I wasn't supportive of Netanyahu, and she got really upset, and she says, to me he's a hero.
Wow.
Yeah, he's a hero. She said he's protecting us from the biggest threat we have. And she said, and I said, what's that? She said, it's Islam. Islam is the biggest threat. and he's protecting us. And this is a person who's a vet who cares for sick animals.
Educated.
Yeah, you'd think this person is a compassionate person, and they probably are in all respects, but it just shows you the power of media, of indoctrination, of how it can take what would naturally be a person who would empathize with others. But because of this indoctrination, the other is perceived as being this evil. And it's pervasive throughout society.
And Tel Aviv is viewed as a liberal city. That's why many of the liberals who live in, for example, Jerusalem, they moved to Tel Aviv. And so we're not talking about the settlers.
No, right.
So this is, in a way, when you are in the West Bank, the only interaction that you have with Israelis, if any, would be with the soldiers at the checkpoints, who are the occupiers, and then also the colonial settlers.
It's intentional. It's intentional that they keep everybody divided so that you don't find commonality. Yeah, I'll give you another story if you want stories about what goes on.
Yeah, we have the full hour.
All right. So, so I had been doing well. You're saying how I live now in Palestine or the West Bank. So I've been doing well by staying out of politics because I had this vision that I wanted to create the sanctuary that was, something that people can look up to as being a model for how we treat other living things in the future, how we treat each other in the future. And that was going along fine until about a year and a half ago. So I have a U.S. passport. I don't have residence. Jamal, do you have residence there?
Well, it's different for people in Jerusalem have Jerusalem ID, and the West Bank they have Palestinian passports. That's their residence.
Yeah, I didn't have one. My family happened to be living in Saudi Arabia in 1967 when Israel took it over, so we were left out.
So you're basically a U.S. citizen. That's
all I have.
That's how you're staying there.
Yes, as a visitor.
Yeah.
Right. So so I would come and go maybe 3-4 times a year. They give me a 3-month visa. They harass me at the border, but they harass all Palestinians at the border. I didn't find it exceptional nor too worrisome. Except there's one time I had this, there's 2 animal sanctuaries that I'm aware of in the West Bank. One of them is run by a woman named Diana Butu in Bethlehem. So me and her were going to go together. I was going to drive her because I have...
Not the Diana Butu from...
Babish, sorry.
Yeah, not Diana, because Diana Butu...
Babish.
Yeah, Babish.
She likes animals, doesn't she?
I know she likes, but
right,
I know.
Good.
Yeah.
No, Babish.
Yeah, Diana
Babish.
It's a different person.
Yes, also my friend, but this was another one, Diana Babish. Anyway, so so me and her were going to go to a village called Jenin because we were going to talk to them about how to do a spay and neuter program.
Right.
So I was driving her from Bethlehem to Jenin, and we got on Waze, and somehow we got distracted, and we ended up at the Israeli border. They stopped us. They pulled us over. They gave us inspection. It turns out she didn't have papers to go inside. And they let her slide, but I was the one who got in trouble because it looked like I was smuggling her in. And the last thing they want is a Palestinian to go into Side of 48 Palestine. That's taboo for them. So they thought I was smuggling her in, and they must have put it in my record. Because from that point on, any interaction I had with Israel ended up very negatively. The next time I interacted with them was I was crossing over from Jordan. For the first time, just to give you my background, I was born in Nablus in the West Bank. Both my parents were born there, and their parents were all born there. My mother's side, they go back 1,000 years. Well,
Abu-Ghazalah, we know when you say Maad Abu-Ghazalah, that immediately for me I know that you're from Nablus.
Yeah, and there's Tamim ad-Dayr. I don't know if you know that. That's a name from thousands of years ago. Those are my family. So we go way back. So I'm crossing the border, and there's the border guard who had a very strong Russian accent, appeared to have just arrived there. We looked at my visa, and she was saying, my passport, and she was saying, I think you're visiting here too much. So even though I have thousands of years of history there.
And you were born there.
I was born there. An immigrant that came maybe 5 years ago from Russia is telling me I'm visiting her country too much. So she said, I'm going to let you in, thank you, but I'm only going to give you 1 month visa and instead of 3, and you shouldn't come this often. You shouldn't come this much. So that was that reaction. Then the next time I interacted with them, I had another dog that got hit by a car. I was taken to a different vet in Tel Aviv, and so I got stopped at the border. Only Palestinians. So this border from the West Bank into 48 Palestine, which is where Tel Aviv is. People call it Israel proper. That's basically just to prevent Palestinians from entering. So if you appear, physical appearance, if you appear Jewish, if you appear like you're a settler, you get through that border by simply waving your hand. Mm-hmm. Going out, they'll let anybody leave, but the last thing they want is Palestinians entering, ethnically Palestinians. So I get harassed every time. I was ready for it. The soldier stops me, and he inspects the car. They always give me special inspection. And they see the dog, and they say, is this your dog? I say, no, I just found him in the street. I have a sanctuary. I'm just taking him inside to Tel Aviv to get veterinary care. And I'll be out in a few hours. Here's the name of the vet. Here's the clinic. And they say, I said, where did you find this dog? I said, in Nablus. And so he said, so the soldier said, so he's an Arab dog? I said, yeah, we found him in Nablus. He said, he looks dirty. He probably has diseases. Go back. You can't bring him. Can you imagine? So,
you're bringing him to treat him. Now, yeah. I'm actually curious because what's the deal with the vets in Tel Aviv? Don't we have any Palestinian vets nearby, or is that... They're trying to work kind of like maybe pro bono or something?
There's not many Palestinian vets that work on domesticated animals like dogs and cats. They're animals that the vets there work on sheep and cows and donkeys, just animals that are used for labor or things like that. So if you have a small animal, there's really nobody there. That's the reason, that's a good question, is why am I having to constantly go to Tel Aviv? There's a law that prevents, and this goes again to the indoctrination, there's a law that prevents an Israeli veterinarian from treating any animal out inside of the West Bank. And if you get caught, you will lose your license. And I've asked many vets to please come help us. Mm-hmm. And many vets said, I really, really honestly want to help you, but I don't want to lose my license. So now I'm obligated to go to them, and only I can do it. The other Palestinians can't because I'm a U.S. citizen. I can cross this border. But let me just finish this story. So after this soldier sent me back telling me I have a dirty Arab dog, I called the clinic. They sent a volunteer to the border who was Jewish and who claimed that this was his dog. So now this was a Jewish dog, and he went straight in. Just no questions asked. He went straight in. The dog got
so
treated.
Racism really...
It's all pervasive. It's everything.
Yeah, so racism does not only apply to people, but also to dogs.
It is. It's tainted. They're tainted.
This is insane. Talking about the borders, because this is something also now with the deal of the century. And, for now... Many years, Palestinians have been complaining about that ugly apartheid wall, but apparently, which basically did not follow also the 1967 borders. Mm-hmm. And now it seems that they've been planning all along to make it basically a border. Mm-hmm. I was looking at I don't know if you read the whole
I didn't go through it all. No.
I went through it all, but for example, Kalandia, which they call Atarot, they are converting it into this big tourist center, like a huge border, selling, of course, Israeli goods and tax-free and whatever. That's according to them. So that's going to be the main entry, one of the main entry points to the West Bank. But then they're going to have different gates, like add gates to that wall. So in fact, that becomes the de facto border to those. But
apartheid is going to be more entrenched than ever. There's going to be a very distinct separation between the Palestinians and the Israelis. The streets are different. There's no opportunity to interact with each other.
Yeah, it is apartheid. People are using it. Are people realizing now in the West Bank that this is the status quo versus just it's an occupation?
The way I can see it present itself is that more and more people are starting to open their minds up to having a one-state solution, which is, there's the settlers are everywhere. There's, 700,000 settlers now. And the thing about the settlements, people say, well, that's so intractable. And honestly, isn't that intractable? I mean, maybe I'm being naive about it, but I don't think what irks people about the settlements is that they've taken so much land, which they have. It's the fear that they're just keep growing and encroaching. I mean, the Palestinians have some land right now, and and the worst part about these settlements is that they're controlled by the laws and everything are controlled by the Israeli military, which means these settlers have complete impunity to actually commit murder. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's well known. That's where the real conflict comes from. It's the fact they've taken so much Palestinian land, but it's more than that. It's the fact that they're controlling the West Bank with the military, and they keep expanding. They keep taking more and more land. That's what's really bothering people.
Yeah, but now the next step is total annexation.
Yeah, they're taking. Well, so
the annexation, which means they'll be part of Israel. So they'll be separately. So that's kind of.
But they're not taking the people. They're taking the land.
Well, not only this, but it's even worse because another component to this agreement, for example, in the Galilee, which is al-Muthallath, we call it, they are proposing transferring 11 villages and townships to the future Palestinian state.
Well, Jamal,
with the caveat that actually these villages, these are people who are Israeli citizens since 1948. So they want to transfer them, which means they want to get rid of about a quarter of a million Palestinians.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's important to point out that from the outside, you look at it, these are Palestinians. They get to live in a Palestinian state. Why are they upset? Maybe it's true what the Israelis are saying is that they're this beacon of freedom and whatever. You have to understand that there is no Palestinian state. There's a Palestinian prison.
That's right.
So when you're saying you're transferring people out of this free society because it's not a prison into the Palestinian prison, you're putting them in jail, where there's no opportunities. Part of this plan was that the entire Palestinian territories are surrounded by Israel. They have no borders to the outside world. So if you're going to try to do any business, if you're trying to leave or come back or import or export, it's all controlled by Israel. So there's very little opportunity for a booming economy there. So you're telling these people, that you're just mentioning that they're being transferred into the Palestinian territories, that you're going to put them in jail. It's not that they're
joining a viable state.
Yeah, it's not that they love Israel so much, they love their system. It's that the fact that at least they're not in prison. That's what they're upset about. And the other thing is somebody was telling me, but look, the Palestinians get more land than they used to have. They get more land in the desert. The Gaza gets expanded, so you get more land in the desert. The most fertile land in the West Bank, which is along the Jordan River. And the water resources, 80% of which are already being taken by Israel, but now they'll have actual physical control of all the water. That gets annexed permanently by Israel.
So let's look a little bit to the future. Assuming that they're going to go through with everything that they have. It's a unilateral decision, or it's a decision by the United States and Israel. Palestinians, obviously, they have rejected it.
They're invisible, so who cares?
It was rejected at the Arab League. It was rejected at the Islamic Conference. President Mahmoud Abbas came to the United Nations, spoke, complained, people listened. It wasn't an actionable item, meaning like there is no vote on it because, as we know, the United States will veto anything that's going to come out, any decision from the United Nations. So let's look, let's say, a year or 2 years ahead, and they start implementing this. What do you think is going to happen?
economy, as bad as it is going to be much worse. I mean, it's not just the prison, but now the prison walls are encroaching on the people. They didn't have control of any of their resources to begin with. They're in survival mode. They're in survival mode, and you know, I don't want to play the victim, but there's just not that much, as you mentioned. You know, they can scream all they want. There's not much Palestinians can do at this point. So it's you know, it's gonna rely on, you know, I hate to say this, but people around the world have to support the Palestinians to create a change. And now I think it's on the table. You know, the abuses of the Israelis is open for everybody to see. The humanitarian abuses, you know, the fact that they've created this prison with so many people. You know, it's as long as America continues to support this dictate. It's not a peace proposal. It's a dictate. This is how it's going to be. There's very little the Palestinians can do, and right now it's just, like I said, just be patient. The Palestinians need to just consolidate their own resources, and right now the thing that's keeping the West Bank together is the families. They're tight families. There's not much money to go around, but they take care of each other, and that's what it is for the time being until we see a change in direction from the U.S. Because, you know, if the U.S. says we're going to pursue this, you tell me, Jamal, what can the Palestinians do?
Well, what's the role of the Palestinian Authority in all of this? I mean, they're the ones who pretty much led the negotiations since Oslo.
Yeah.
It's been since 1991, and they haven't met any of the people's expectations. Mm-hmm.
They've met Israel's expectations.
They've done that on the security level,
yeah.
And now they're saying that they're going to be ending security cooperation. The Trump administration recently, I actually just read that 2 days ago in the New York Times, said that they're going to be, because they've cut off aid, about $800 million worth of aid.
The Trump did, not the Palestinians. I mean, it was.
But I was just saying, but they're saying now, and they left some aid for security,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they said if they change, basically stop the coordination, that they will cut off aid altogether.
So right now, the Palestinian Authority is perceived by the people as the Vichy government. That their role is basically to implement Israeli policy. That's not a secret. You know, I don't think I'm saying anything controversial. Hopefully, this will lead them to try to rid themselves of that label. Because, for example, when I'm sure you've heard that there's something like 300 children, Palestinian children from the West Bank that are rotting in Israeli jails every year. How do they get these children? The Israeli military sends notice to the Palestinian Authority, who's in charge of security in, for example, in Nablus and other Palestinian cities. They say, hey, we're coming to kidnap a kid. Please get out of the way. And they do. They get out of the way, middle of the night, and you see Israeli tanks coming in, kidnapping a child. They leave, and then the Palestinian Authority comes back and controls the situation. How else can you look at that other than they're a Vichy government? That they're put in power by the enemy in order to create a layer between the Israelis and the Palestinian people. So maybe if there'll be a point at which the Palestinian Authority says we're through being their lackey. Maybe this is it. I don't know. I mean, you're seeing.
What do you think? Do you think? I mean, there have been some calls saying, well, maybe they should just pack their bags and go home and dismantle. Mm-hmm. And so what will happen having, this vacuum then?
I don't see them leaving. They have so much power, so much money. What would it take? Why would they go? I mean, they have.
So this is out of the question. You don't think?
I don't see any movement in that direction. Yeah. I see the Palestinian Authority consolidating power, building bigger villas in Jericho. I don't see them sharing power with anybody else.
So you just maybe hoping that they will change their attitude? Is that it? Just become more nationalistic and stop?
I don't want to hope. I think you have to create change, and the change has to come. these are theories because nobody has answers there, right? So my theory is that, the Palestinians have to get to the point where they accept the fact that they have been victimized, that there's not much in their power, and then get to the next level of saying, okay, I don't want to be identified as a victim. I want to be able to take as much control of my life as I can. And that's when change can happen. If we're expecting to go to the leadership and just change the leadership by giving them good philosophical arguments or moral arguments, they're not going to give up a dime. But if the people start to recognize that they're not just victims, they've been victimized, but they have power, and start to mobilize and start to act as if their behavior can change the world, I think that's how you do it, not from the top down, but from the bottom up. And so, little things are important. You just have to empower the people, because the frustration is, as with this Trump dictate, is to think that everything is happening to you and you have no control of anything in your life. And it's just not true. You start with the little things. Start by cleaning the streets. Why are the streets dirty? Israel has nothing to do with that, but the Palestinians are just so frustrated with life, they just don't care, so they toss garbage out. Be proud of your environment. Feel that you're a part of something bigger. I want the Palestinians to start to recognize that they are not just victims, but they're part of the human race. They're part of all living creatures in the world. And so that they don't start to feel that they're, in a corner where there's nothing that they can do.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right, because that's something that always irritated me traveling, to Jerusalem and the West Bank and wherever, and you see, especially, in the midst of our beautiful country.
Yeah, the rolling hills.
People throwing trash, construction material, and that's,
because they've given up.
That's something very frustrating. I want to switch gears, maybe it's a little bit to a more positive outlook,
please.
And let's talk about
you need a hug, Jamal,
why everyone needs a daily hug.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your project. I mean, I'm so proud of you. You've how many years has it been now?
I started in 2013, so 7 years.
It was just like an idea, and now you actually have a sanctuary right there in Asira near Nablus. How many animals you kind of take care of?
We started with a one-eyed donkey and a dog in 2013, and now we have 30 dogs and 17 donkeys.
But it's more than a sanctuary, because also it's a sanctuary for children.
Yeah. That was the idea from the start, is I wanted to do not just a shelter for animals, but I wanted to impact the society. So I started bringing in children, especially children with autism, other mental disorders, and it actually was good therapy for them, because as I was saying, they're in a prison, right? They're in constant pressure, violence around them. They all know people who've been imprisoned or injured, and so they need something like this. They need something to make them feel that life's worth living, that there are good things in life. And all they do is I bring them out. They this is how it happens most of the time. They come out. They're afraid of these animals. They've been taught that dogs are dirty and that they're violent, so they're afraid of the dogs. But our dogs are just amazing dogs. Most of them. Some of them get scared and run away. We have areas for them when the kids come. There's places where the dogs can go if they don't feel like interacting, but a lot of them just love kids, especially the puppies. So they'll come running up to the kids. At first, the kids are afraid of them, and maybe they might from a distance, touch one. But I take them by the hand one by one, and I start having them interact intimately, like physically, with the animals, with the donkeys, giving a donkey a hug. Donkeys, believe it or not, love to be hugged.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's one called Helu who comes running after you and won't leave unless you give him a hug.
That's cute.
Right, and so it changes them. It changes this anxiety inside of them. And there's just something peaceful about connecting with other living beings.
I mean, it sounds like But that's why I said I don't want to just talk about this just as a daily Hugz as just an animal sanctuary. You're really providing therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Really,
for me too, because I get under stress, and when I'm out there.
So what's the reaction of the parents? I mean, the children, of course, it's easier to kind of win the hearts and minds of children, especially when it comes to animals. I know culturally, because when you talk about dogs, people, Palestinians, they look at dogs as either a working dog, which is fine for shepherds or whatever, but not really like a pet.
Yeah, you have to use them for something, or they're not.
Guard dogs.
Dismiss them.
Yeah, it's
they're
not,
guard dogs too.
Yeah.
So they don't. The parents, it's hard to change their mentality. So first of all, when I started the sanctuary, they made fun of it. It's like, with all these problems around, you're going to go help a donkey. They didn't understand it.
Well, that's why. This is something people will be accusing you about priority. They'll say, why don't you feed people? Why are you feeding dogs and donkeys?
Because we're all connected, right? It's not one or the other. It's not like if I feed a donkey, I'm hurting a Palestinian. I think I'm helping people by, like I said, making these connections, making them feel more open, making them have hope that there's something in life that's worth living for. Mm-hmm. So I don't prioritize either I help animals or I help Palestinians or I help somebody else. It's like, if you're in this world, try to do good, and don't prioritize one life over another life. It's all valuable. So for the parents, it's hard to change that mentality that we're talking about, is that they dismiss them as just being something there to be used. And until they see the children, how much fun they have.
Yeah.
Fun that they aren't able to provide for their children.
They bring dogs to hospitals. They bring dogs to children who are physically challenged.
Yeah, in this country.
Because they know the effect and how it helps these people, how they help these people.
There have been lots of studies about that, but you have to overcome the fear. And so, like, I had this one dog that I needed to get x-rayed. Her name was Panda, like a beautiful husky dog. It was a husky mix with a broken arm. Taking this dog through the town of Nablus, very extremely friendly, well-behaved dog. As I was walking on the sidewalk, everybody was jumping to the other side of the road. They were scared. They were petrified of this animal.
Yeah.
And again, it shows you what happens when you don't have interaction. When all you've seen and heard is that dogs are rabid or whatever. That's what I had to overcome is this fear of these other beautiful creatures, which the children don't have. They start with it.
That's the beauty about the innocence.
It's easy to change.
Yeah. How many acres do you have?
It's 1 acre.
It's 1 acre, and I know every time you come here, you bring us olive oil.
Yeah.
And I want to show it here to our viewers on Facebook Live. Mm-hmm. But it's really, delicious. Palestina olive oil, you called it. This is like one way to kind of support
lots of things.
Daily Hugz.
And
also you're kind of living off the land almost, in a way.
That's the future I want to see of Palestine is more emphasis on this traditional lifestyle. Palestinians are traditionally olive farmers. Their olive trees are thousands of years old from the Roman era. So I pick these olives. I have volunteers come from the U.S. that help pick the olives. We press them. We send olive oil back to the U.S. and then I sell it in the U.S. to support the sanctuary. And last year we were able to care for 30 dogs and 17 donkeys through without additional donations on my behalf. It's self-sustaining now through the sale of olive oil. And one thing, you're saying how delicious this is, but as a Palestinian, everybody's going to say, well, you're not very objective. So out of curiosity, I sent a sample of this olive oil a couple of weeks ago.
I'll show it again to some people are asking about it.
Yeah, so I sent it to a laboratory to be tested. The big thing now, the superfood now, is everybody's talking about the polyphenol content of foods, which is a strong antioxidant. And what makes the Mediterranean diet so special is this olive oil with all these polyphenols in it. So good oil you find in the supermarket will have about 150 to 250 milligrams per kilogram of polyphenols. The Italian brands, which are considered the best, may get a little bit under 300. So the results came back on this oil. It's 519 milligrams per kilogram polyphenols, which means it's more than twice as concentrated as the store-bought olive oil.
Wow, and
you can smell it and taste it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's up there. It's really delicious, and I think it's a great idea in a way.
Well, it supports the Palestinian tradition.
You support the Palestinian tradition, but also you support the sanctuary.
Yeah.
So when people want to help you or help the sanctuary, where should they go? They go to your website?
Yeah, there's a website. If you just want to buy the oil, it's PalestinaOliveOil.com. Or you can look at our Facebook group, which have lots of good pictures of donkeys. We've had a couple of baby donkeys that have come to the sanctuary recently, and some of our dogs. That's Facebook.com/groups/daily Hugz.
Well, how do you ship it here? I mean, people, you just come here when you bring a shipment here, or people?
So I piggyback on. There's a village in Palestine called Turmusaya.
Turmusaya. A lot of them live in the United States.
Exactly. So one guy from Turmusaya came to America and said, "It's a beautiful country." Brought all of his family and relatives, so the entire village emptied out into the U.S.
Right.
The ones that remain behind, it's all olive orchards there. Most of Palestine is olive orchards. So the relatives there pick their olives. They send them oil back to the owners of the land. They still own their land in Turmusaya. I piggyback. They rent out containers and ship them. I piggyback my olive oil on Turmusaya's oil, and it gets shipped here. They take care of the customs and everything, and then they deliver it, and then I bottle it here, and I go cross country. Last year I drove the circumference of the United States, 10,000 miles.
Wow.
Selling or distributing the olive oil.
Wow.
And talking about Hugz.
You talked earlier about volunteers coming for the harvest, and also volunteers coming to help taking care of the animals.
They do.
I mean, people come from the. I mean, how?
Well, since the Israelis don't let me go there permanently or stay as much as I'd like, we need people to be there to care for the animals. Because the local people, like as we were mentioning, don't have much knowledge or history interacting with dogs and donkeys in the way that we'd like them to. So we'd love to have volunteers over. There's a cabin there they can stay at, and the main thing you want for them is just to care and love the
What
animals.
about veterinarians? Because it seems to be this kind of struggling with this whole idea that when you need a vet that you have to go all the way to Tel Aviv.
And get stopped at the border.
I mean, have you kind of tried to approach, I mean, is there something like, how Doctors Without Borders, is there?
There's one. Yeah,
There's one, Veterinarians Without Borders?
There is one, just like that. And I met them at an animal rights conference, and I told them, look, we'd love to have like a spay and neuter program. And they do that that's what they do, is they go around the country, around the world, to Africa, all over the place. And they do these spay and neuter programs. And we made an appointment a week before they were going to come do this program in Palestine, in Nablus. They said, what city are you exactly in? I said, it's just outside of Nablus. They say, oh, we thought you were in Israel. You're in the West Bank. That's too dangerous.
Wow.
1 week before we were all ready for them to come, they canceled. It's too dangerous.
But we should have told them maybe you were in a settlement. They would have come, right?
In a minute.
Yeah, if you said, this is ridiculous. This is really sad. I mean, that, something like this would happen. And this is actually very important because what you were saying, I mean, we know when you go somewhere in Palestine, it's like 1,000 cat, right? I mean, I love cats, but you need to.
Yeah, and they're right now their idea of population control is they poison them and shoot them, and it's really disturbing. And they don't want to do that. They have this problem, and they don't have the means to do what I think should be done, which is a spay and neuter program. So if we had we've tried several initiatives to that, to spay and neuter rather than poison. but the funding's just not there. I mean, it's easy to be judgmental and say, why are their roads have potholes? Why? They don't have resources, so they're in survival mode. And this is something we've talked to many municipalities. They want to do a spay and neuter program, but we just don't have the money for it.
How's your relationship with the villagers? I mean, I'm just like thinking you picked one of the smallest villages. I didn't know Asira. I mean, I actually know where Asira because
it's near Talluza.
And then when we were kids, when someone wanted to talk about something very far, they'd say, "Oh, it's very far. It's near Talluza,"
which means out of the middle of nowhere.
In the middle of nowhere.
In the boonies.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we are in the boonies.
So you basically came. People initially would look at you like you're a Palestinian American.
They didn't know what I was up to.
What the hell are you doing here? Why you're coming back here? And what? You're going to start a shelter for animals?
Right. That's exactly right. They didn't know what to make of it. They thought this guy's just throwing money around, wasting his money. But, it's changed every year. It's gotten my relationship with the villagers and pretty much the whole West Bank has gotten better and better because they see we're not just talk. We're not just saying, we want you to do that, or dictating to them, we want you to do this or that. We're actually helping. We're changing the situation on the ground. And so when they see that, we're now getting calls from all over the West Bank saying, hey, we found a dog in the street. Can you help us?
Wow.
In Asira itself, we've employed a lot of people in Asira. So now it's not just this guy from Nablus or from the U.S. It's somebody who's helping the community. During the olive harvest, yes, we have volunteers from the U.S., but I hope they don't take this the wrong way. But they pick a couple of buckets. That's just their stamina just isn't there.
Yeah.
So basically, the olives the vast majority of the olives are picked by the local residents, and they mean something to them.
And means something. They do it every year.
And they would have probably been offended if it was volunteers coming from the U.S. preventing them from being able to earn this little bit of money that they rely on every year. So we still do that. We still bring them in. And the fact that we're being part of the community in so many ways now, it makes me feel great. I just wish the Israelis don't stop me on the border and prevent me from coming in.
Well, this is wonderful. I hope people will go to Daily Hugz website or your Facebook page and try to help this great project. You can purchase some Palestinian olive oil or just make a donation. And, it's always a pleasure having you here, Maad, anytime when you come back with new stories. And again, just maybe I didn't give you justice in the introduction, aside from knowing you for 20 years, but people don't know that you have a master's in computer science, you have a law degree, you ran for Congress.
Now I'm picking up dung behind donkeys.
And now, this is your passion, saving the world. It's always been. You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPO San Francisco. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to get for free all the our recent archives. Subscribe to our archives right there, and also you could watch us on Facebook Live. Talk to you next week.